listening to Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care VigR, a podcast where we explore what it's like getting older, the peaks, the valleys, and everything in between. In this season of Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care VigR, we're covering topics related to vibrant aging. I'm your host, Cheryl Praska. Let's grow old together. Today's episode is a special one. I'm joined by Nina Foster, a Friends Life Care member whose life has been closely connected to the world of art. Nina is the daughter of American painter Harold Weston, an artist known for his expressive landscapes and his deep connection to the natural world. In our conversation, Nina reflects on what it was like growing up with a father devoted to creativity, how she came to help preserve his artistic legacy, and why planning ahead for aging in place has been an important part of her own story. Nina, welcome to Honestly Aging. It's such a pleasure to have you here. To start, can you briefly introduce yourself?
Hi there. I'm so glad to be here. I'm presently in Pennsylvania, but I was born in France. The reason I was born in France is because my parents, as a young couple, decided to find a place where he could paint, and they, in effect, were kind of hippies. So they lived in the Pyrenees in a section that is Catalan. They speak Catalan. And they had rooms in this, I guess, farmhouse. But the farmhouse had a chapel, a 12th century chapel at one end. And the sheep underneath the floor were the source of heat, if you could believe it.
No, I can't.
So anyhow, a year or so went by and I was produced. My mother never made it to the American hospital, so they paused down in Perpignan, where I was born, in a Catholic clinic, a great big 9-pounder.
Oh, wow.
Anyhow, back to the States in a few years. My father, who was had decided he'd be a serious artist after he'd finished Harvard, headed back to the Adirondacks, where he'd always summered with his family. So he was well equipped to use the Adirondacks as his subject matter. And there we grew up, small family. We lived half a mile from anywhere. And so that meant walking down to meet the school bus. The school bus wouldn't come any closer. But those were good years. They were full of snow, and my mother cooked over a wood stove, and it was just us. It was fine. Then we jump ahead, and I'm already in college, and then I'm married, and then we're living in New York. So life took its turns, and now here I am back in Pennsylvania.
Thanks for sharing all that. It really sets a lot of perspective for me to understand what it's like for you growing up. And as you started talking about, your father was the painter Harold Weston. And I'm thinking that growing up in that environment must have been fascinating. What was it like growing up with an artist as a parent?
It was really pretty well defined. He had his studio. Actually, the house that we lived in began as his one-room studio, which he had built. Then he added on a bedroom when he got married, and a proper kitchen. But anyhow, his studio was part of the house with a door that was definitely closed when he was working in there. So you didn't just go in. We kids just didn't. But if you were invited in to pose, maybe you were invited in to see some work he wanted, he needed a title for, something like that. If he invited, then you went in. Otherwise, that was an inner sanctum. So that it was a very defined kind of family. My mother had her role, keeping things together, and we just went to school.
So it sounds like by that being well, the well defined of the studio, it seems like it was much of a nucleus for him. And as children, there was a bit of a pull to know what's going on in the studio, however, by invitation only. And so it sounds to me like you all like knew that the artwork mattered in the family. Do you remember though when you first realized that your father's work mattered to people beyond your family?
Oh, yes, because what happened in the summer, I mentioned the winters because they were sort of, I don't know, uh, touchstone, if you will, of the way of living. But in the summer, the whole population changed, and it were summer people who came to play golf and, pleasure themselves. So smartly, my parents would invite people to look at the paintings. And my mother was out in the living room with her little Turkish tea service and would pleasantly entertain them. But he made sales that way. And actually, I should have said before that his reputation was pretty established because his first show was a huge success. And then in the 30s, he was shown in lots of galleries in New York. So the people that came in the summer began to build these collections and were happy to see his current work.
So, in a sense, your mom was his gallerist. Your mom was his sales associate. Your mom was his marketing professional. And she was really there for him, for him personally as well as his career. That sounds
Yes.
like a life lesson that you learned from your parents. I'm also curious to hear more about like what else did you learn about life from watching how your parents interacted, especially in relation to the way they worked together regarding your father's art?
Well, it would take a leap to the end of his life when my mother is now a widow with lots of paintings and artwork that she doesn't know what to do with. But she was in her 70s, so she was a youngster. But she very quickly decided that a way to continue to honor his work and actually her feelings towards it would be to start mounting shows. So, because he had not been interested at the end of his life, he just wanted to paint. He wasn't interested in going for a deal or anything. So she took it on and started doing these shows, which is really remarkable because she'd never done anything like that before. But there was a lot of compelling emotion to take it on. So that was, a perfect sort of testimony to their relationship. She was carrying it forward.
Anything more you want to share about your family dynamic from when you were a child?
Oh, well, probably summed it up enough. We were very independent because we were isolated, so it sort of had to be independent, and which actually helped because then when I decided to leave the Adirondacks, and for an interim, we lived with a grandfather in New Jersey, and I went off to a boarding school, but I felt secure about that, and I think it was because my brother and I had just grown up with a sense of having to do it ourselves, having to walk to school having to bring the wood in to keep the wood fire going and all those chores that you have if you're kind of living off the land.
And when your mom in her 70s started really trying to showcase your father's artwork, and at some point, you also got involved in helping preserve and share your father's work through the Harold Weston Foundation. What inspired you to start the Harold Weston Foundation, or was that something that your mom started and you carried it forward?
Well, excellent question. And I can be pretty precise about that. My father had left certain work in a trust, which is not unusual. But in a few years, I took a look at that, and there was language in there that indicated the trust would end when his children were no longer around. And I thought that didn't really make sense. We want the paintings to go on. We don't care about the people. So I think it wasn't until 2000 that I was able to put the Harold Weston Foundation together, because we had to do the legal things to make it right. But the foundation is a great idea because now it's an open sort of forum, you could say, for people they could borrow the paintings. If it's a museum show, you can loan paintings. People can leave them to the foundation because it's a nonprofit, and it's a very viable organization.
Yes, absolutely. And what would you say is your primary mission for the foundation today?
Just to make the Harold Weston work available, either for archives, lots of records, or the actual paintings, and by being open that way, you spread his name and the value of his work.
So is there any way that you're like promoting the foundation and getting his artwork out there for public consumption?
Oh, sure. Well, we do have a website, and it's just haroldweston.org. And my daughter is very involved, which is great. And she's a techie person who adds new information to the website, for instance. And we also have, which is kind of fun, a lost and found page, because with a long career of painting, there are lots of pieces that we haven't a clue where they are. But if you post some information about it, or you post the image, we have had responses that way, and that's kind of fun.
Now, we've talked a lot about your father's story, and it is quite remarkable what he was able to accomplish in his life. I would like to pivot and hear more about your life. And we heard somewhat about your childhood. I'd be interested if you could tell us about your adult life, your family, and the professional path that you've taken.
Okay, well, it's different because the man I married was a teacher, and he became an administrator. And at the time, I thought I should be supportive of the faculty, which meant a lot of faculty parties and keeping in touch, which was a good thing, but it wasn't, I wasn't contributing much other than a great party. So it was back in Nashville when we lived there, and he was running a elementary school, that I had the idea of doing a volunteer organization that represented all different types of people in Nashville, the country music, the Black people, the rich white, whatever. And we would be a support group that would kind of advertise ourselves as a way of finding students or other people who would like to volunteer for, say, a job in an unwed mother's home, which they still had back then, or, doing volunteer work in a hospital or other thing. And that got kind of big, which was exciting. So I was in the community world, call it, so that when we moved to New York City, and lived there, I took it one step further, and that was a lot of advocacy was going on for consumer products like Ralph Nader and people like that. And I decided I could do that work, but in a hospital, advocating for patients' rights. And ended up, I didn't want to go to school, so I ended up just offering myself to the Queens Public Hospital. Took a train out there and got my credentials together just by volunteering, and then finally got hired by Mount Sinai. And it was the perfect job, the paid job, and it was a time of the AIDS patients. So we learned a lot, learned all kinds of things from that SAD group. And the main focus, of course, was to get the whole idea of patient rights as a legal requirement. So that was satisfying.
It's drawing some parallels between your mom's life and your life, where you both started by supporting your husbands, and then moved on to really, I'm sure you were, like, as you said, you were independent. I'm sure your mom had independence in her. You were really able to accomplish a lot as your own individual selves too, in addition to supporting your husbands and really having a big impact on a larger community. It's amazing to me. And also knowing from what my grandmother tells me that it wasn't easy to be a woman who worked when you were putting yourself out there and working. So the fact that you did have the independence and confidence to really say, I know what I'm doing here. I'm going to go get my own job, as well as support the community, is really admirable. And to work with AIDS patients at a time, it was probably pretty scary to do that. I just want to acknowledge all the contributions that you made to people who really needed it. Would you prefer to age independently in your own home or live in a nursing facility? I know what I'd rather do. Friends Life Care membership offers just that. Plan today for a future lived at home with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience while protecting your savings. Learn about your options at a free seminar or webinar. Register at friendslifecare.org/register or call 215-628-8964. Welcome back to Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care VigR, where today I'm joined by Nina Foster for a thoughtful conversation about her life, her experience as a Friends Life Care member, and the unique perspective she brings as the daughter of American painter Harold Weston. In addition to being in your adult life a wife and a professional, you are also a parent. And I'd be curious to hear, in what ways do you think that your parenting was similar to your parents, and how might it be different?
When we raised our children, they were much more into a social aspect that we didn't necessarily have. I think we were a little socially awkward, if you will, growing up, because it just didn't have any play pals. But by the time Essie and I are parents, why, the kids, they've got the scouts, they've got all kinds of groups that that are important to them. And even sororities, I hate to say it, but one of these, I think it was in Nashville, there was a girl sorority that, they had to belong to. So all of that was a big change.
And it's gotten even more now with youth sports. So I'm feeling that right now, the need to be involved so young with getting your children involved in sports and activities. So I absolutely hear what you're saying. One other aspect that I want to talk about is that you're a member of Friends Life Care, which is the way that I was able to get connected with you. And Friends Life Care, we're an organization focused on helping people age in place. And I'd like to know what inspired you to think ahead about planning for your future and looking into Friends Life Care.
Well, that's another good question and another nice segue, because when we moved down here to Kendall Crosslands, which is a retirement place, we have a particular section where we live independently. We do our own meals and groceries and take care of matters. We're backed up by Kendall Crosslands, but we provide for our own needs. So it seemed to us, and actually I was given the date of 2003 when we first joined, and I believe it must have been another neighbor up in this small community that said, hey, to make this work, you should join Friend Life Care so that you'll have that support when and if you need it. So that's what I did, and that's almost 25 years, I think, that I've been a member.
Mm. And an interesting fact for the Honestly Aging audience is that Nina was friends with fellow Friends Life Care member and podcast guest Fred Dawson. Fred recently passed away, and Nina had the lovely idea to pay homage to Fred by reading one of his poems. Before you read the poem that you selected, Nina, what might you like to share about Fred?
Well, it was impressive that he had 2 or 3 distinctive and separate careers, which, requires a certain self-starting kind of energy and vision if you're going to do that. So that was impressive. And then the fun of late in life, his taking up poetry. And I think he had a group he wrote with. So it was really important to him. The poem I'd like to read, it's interesting because he gave me a version of it, but then he has another version in the leather-bound book that he left for all of us. And the difference is in the last paragraph, but I'll get to that. All right?
Yeah, I'm ready to hear you read this poem. Yes, please do. And thank you.
Okay. He calls it Shapes Number 4. I am the sun, sustenance for all. I am a cup of moss clinging in a stream. I am a blade of grass bending in the wind. I am a tree, majestic, reaching for the sky. I am an ant following directions. I am a serpent, mythological for many. I am a bird in flight, in song. I am 4-legged hunter or hunted. I am 2-legged, reaching for wisdom and caring. I am all of these, no more, no less. But the mystery still to ponder with more time ahead than behind. Certainly a positive outlook. The version that he gave me ends with a sentence about, and dreams of sweet melodies. But I like the idea of mystery still to ponder is a stronger feeling. And he changed it to this stronger feeling. So good for him.
So one thing that you pulled out was that you liked the mystery still to ponder. Are there any other thoughts that you have about the poem and why you chose to share that one in particular?
Well, I chose it because he had given me the first version. And then in reading through his collection, his final collection, I see there's another version. So it just tells me that he was always striving. He was wanting to perfect it in some way, which is pretty good when you get older, that people often lose energy or interest, but he didn't.
And then anything else about why that poem speaks to you or what you think it means?
Well, I think he's doing a kind of a Walt Whitman thing of feeling very one with the earth. And the idea of continuity is in there. And a strong affinity with nature.
Mm-hmm.
And, openness to what comes along, which would be about the mystery still to ponder.
Lovely.
Quite a lot to get out of the poem.
Yes. I'm thinking through myself, and what's speaking really to me is the nature aspect of it too. That stood out to me the most. So that's interesting just to hear you reflect on the poem as well. And thank you for sharing it. Now I want to bring us back to your family legacy. How do you hope to continue carrying it forward through the Harold Weston Foundation?
Well, one thing, as I've said before, is that it's certainly brought greater recognition to Harold Weston's work, because we have been able to support gallery shows and support big exhibitions too. So that part is great. The other is the value of the work. Every time you have an exhibition or they're showing things, the value of the paintings goes up, and we've been able to maintain that. When he died, the value was minimal, as an estate matter. There was too much work, it wasn't organized, and at that point, nobody really knew about it. He didn't have a name. He has a bit of a name now, and people are collectors. Collectors are serious about his work. They get them at auctions and various places. Of course, what I'd love to do, but it's about a 10-year project, I think, is to have what they call a catalog raisonné. And that means you document every single piece of art you can possibly find in a huge volume. And it's a big job. So somebody else will have to take that on, I think.
Your daughter.
Yeah.
So we've talked so much about the art of Harold Weston. We're now going to take a short pause while I get set up, and Nina has graciously offered to share a few pieces of her father's work with us and tell us anything she'd like to about it. So we'll be right back with that.
Okay.
All right, I have the artwork show up to explain over the screen, and Nina has selected 4 paintings that she's going to be talking to us about. And the first one is called Birch Tree. Nina, what would you like to share about this art?
Well, several things. Thank you for this opportunity to show off one of his paintings that was in his first one-man show in 1922 in New York City. And he was so energized to do this work that he also carved frames for these pieces for all the landscapes. There were about 60 landscapes. And you see in Birch Tree, one of his, all the frames were different, and this is one of them that he carved. So clearly he's thinking about the subject matter, and it really enhanced the paintings. So bringing it to the present day about these frames, the Philadelphia Museum of Art owns a landscape. It's an elm tree, and the original frame was so meaningless on it that the foundation did a project of getting a replica of the frame for that elm tree, which is now sporting the decent kind of frame. And we did the same for a painting that the Museum of Fine Arts has in Boston. It too needed, it was from 1922, so it was appropriate to have a hand carved frame, and we know a fellow who does this fine work. So now they have a hand carved frame around that painting. So that's a good example of how he created the ideas for these frames. Thank you.
And now on the screen, we see Squash Enthroned.
And this is fun because this is basically a portrait of a squash in his studio. It's on a chair that is made in Canada. It's got leather thongs, and it's called habitant chair. And the hanging behind it has a Persian influence. It's probably a cloth he brought back when he was in the Middle East. So the whole thing it sets up this, common squash to have a very elegant setting. And it was done in 1932.
Now we see Upstate Farm.
Yeah, and this would be back in the Adirondacks. He did it in the late 30s. And what's interesting, this is a watercolor. And in France, he learned how to use watercolor on different toned colored papers. So when he came back to this country, so this one, just as an example, it's a wash paint, which is a thicker watercolor, but it's done on orange paper. So you sort of get that tonality coming through.
This is Forever Wild.
Right. And this is done in 1960. He had become kind of discontent with realism and painting some murals back in the late 30s were all realistic. They now they were put in the Washington building and may or may not be saved. We're hoping they will be. Anyhow, he was tired of painting realistically, and he also wasn't so mobile. He wasn't walking as much. So he would find patterns in nature, which pleased him a lot, like the veins of a fungus, like you see here, or whatever it was. So it became a kind of singular expression of abstraction.
So before we close, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story and these reflections with us today and your father's art. You had mentioned that people can visit the website at haroldweston.org. You can see these paintings and others there. And then is there anywhere else, if anyone wants to learn more about Harold Weston and explore the artwork, that they could go, or any plans to have any shows or any galleries where his art will be hanging?
Well, actually, we've got an interesting project up in the mountains where my brother and I walked to the school bus. That same village, they asked for a Weston that they could auction this summer. And so we gave them one, and they're very excited about it, and sending out press releases and whatever. And this one painting will be, it's a landscape, and it will bring a lot of money to the library because of the auction process. And it's something that the foundation could do by offering it to them. So that's probably a good community example.
Lovely. Well, Nina, anything else to add before I let you go for today?
Well, this has been a lot of fun. I can't think of anything. You're a very good interviewer.
And you're a very good guest. And I'm excited for the listeners to learn more about you and Harold Weston's artwork. Thank you so much for being with me today, Nina.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you for listening to Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care VigR, a unique program focused on aging with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience. You can find links and show notes from this episode on our website at friendslifecare.org/podcast. Thank you to Nina Foster for joining us today. You can learn more about the life and work of her father, Harold Weston, by visiting haroldweston.org. I also want to note that the watercolor painting behind Nina throughout the episode is titled Silent Barriers. Weston turned this piece upside down to create an oil on canvas that he titled Tensions. Tensions was given to the Whitney Museum of Art by a group of artists who had purchased it in gratitude for Harold Weston's advocacy for legislation to support the arts. If you like our show, please rate, review, subscribe, and join us next time. To learn more about aging with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience, subscribe to our blog at friendslifecare.org/blog.